So I'd like to welcome you all back to this second part of our series on how to prevent life from setting you up to fail. Last week we talked about the problem, didn't we, out there? We explored the problem of how things happen in our lives, and we learn different ways of coping, and then that sets us up in so many unexpected ways for things to just not work in our favor. So today we're going to be looking specifically at practical ways to notice, first of all, how if the patterns you're following is looping in a negative pattern that can make you fail over and over again, and how you can practically break out of that. I'm just wondering, Althea, is there anything you wanted to say before for us to start?
I'm really looking forward to the discussion because I think it's really important to see things from different perspectives as well, and just
Hmm.
really how, yes, okay, we're looking at a almost like a particular character from a collection of experiences, real experiences. I think that everybody will be able to identify something from it from themselves and actually be able to learn from it. So yeah, let's
Cool.
go.
Cool. So today we're going to be using a strategy which I've decided to call hot pepper sauce formula. And we're going to be playing a bit of a game where Althea is being set up. She's being set up. You're going to be trying to identify what the words and the formulas are all meaning. So I'm just going to be giving you hints, clues, and hopefully that will just make this more engaging as people are trying to learn the strategies. I can see how it's looking at. Okay, you're trying to set me up.
Set me up. So prepared with this one this time.
You're prepared for it this time.
I feel a little bit more prepared. Don't like failure and all of that. We'll see how we get on.
Okay, but just to set the context first of all. So last video we talked about Karima, and we talked about how Karima's experience of
Chimera.
being in a toxic marriage and then breaking up from that marriage colored her new relationships, where she was now in a loving relationship, and although he was kind, caring, and understanding, and nowhere anywhere like her older partner, she could not just divorce herself from the reality of that experience. And that heavily colored her experience in this new relationship. So she couldn't really enjoy it. And so we're talking about how through our experience we develop instincts. And through those instincts, we either respond to life in a very knee-jerk way sometimes. And sometimes we may over overthink and over prepare for life as well. So we've got those two extremes, spending too much time thinking heavily about anything we want to do, or just reacting because that's the gut instincts that we have. And whilst they are not necessarily bad of themselves, both extremes, if we lean towards one more than the other for too long, we tend to start bring problems into our lives. Did that explanation make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Quite good to me.
Cool. And so that kind of brings us into this strategy. How do we make sure that things don't make us fail? Because what happens is if you keep on living based on your instincts and reacting to life based on instincts, you run into problems. And I'll give an example. Another client of mine who her experiences in life has led her to always worry and expect things to go wrong. So she's always preparing for things to go wrong and trying to prevent things from going wrong. But the more she does that, the more she became stressed, the more she became worried, the more she developed a lot of minor stress related illnesses. So her life was really heavily colored by that experience. Okay, so the client was spending a lot of time and effort just planning and preparing for the worst case scenarios. And so a lot of the work we had to do in therapy was to reduce that instinct, to help her actually catch that instinct and then reduce that instinct. So you have that in that situation. But you may have another situation where this client was so keen on being positive. So the
Mm.
instinct for the client was, you must be a positive person, or always deal with things positively. But that results in almost glossing over problems because you're being positive,
Mm.
which means problems pile up. And then actually client gets depressed as a result, right? So these two examples that we just gave just highlights how sometimes the instinct we develop because of the experiences we've had then make us behave in ways that then sabotage us
Yeah.
unintentionally. Yeah.
And then just as we were talking about just both those scenarios as well, I realized how looking from a team point of view, how that also sabotages people around them as well. The
Mm.
first person I can identify with, because coming from a project management background initially, that profession, everything was all about mitigating risk. So for me, you could come to me with a solution, or you're going to show me something that you've done which you think is amazing, and the first thing I'm going to do is look at the problem. I'm going to like gloss over the fact that, yeah, it looks amazing, but I'm going to always put out, yeah, but what about this? Have you thought about this? And so that then gets the other person down, because they think, why are you like focusing on what they deem to be like the negative rather
Mm-hmm.
than praising them for the positive? And it's not that I haven't recognized the positive, but my mind is, okay, that looks excellent, but I just haven't verbally said it. But then I focus on, yeah, but what about this? And equally to the other scenario about the real positivity, being positive all the time. And that, what that does for other people, it just makes them seem like they're no longer relatable, because you can't understand actually that I'm actually going through something that I consider to be quite harsh or serious, or it's affecting me in this way. You want to sing hymns or like be,
Mm-hmm.
really gloss over it. And
Mm.
so that when your behavior is like that, that then sends a divide between you and your peers, or you and relationships as well, because
Exactly.
people thinking you're not really paying attention. And then that then will also have an effect on you. So as much as
Exactly.
there's self-sabotage, that then has an effect on you, because now you're thinking, oh goodness, why are all these people around me
Mm.
like against me? I'm just trying to do something that's right. But
Exactly.
now, and not really recognizing that, because you're in your own little bubble of, actually, this is, why can't everyone just be positive and see the positive outlook and see the glass is half full, not half empty? But
Mm-mm.
because you're not actually say, oh, I actually recognize that this isn't an ideal situation, but look at the positive. And again, with the first situation, it's like I could have said, oh yeah, that's amazing what you're doing. What
Mm-hmm.
about this? Have you looked at that risk side? But they tend to just focus on one side. That again, back to that extreme, which is what causes
Exactly.
that sabotage.
Exactly. And going back to that example of the positive person, that positive person not recognizing that if they're in a relationship, that
Mm.
what tends to happen is that the other person in their life has to carry the burden of the things they're glossing over because of being positive. But
Mm.
they're not being positive. So the stress goes on the other person. And you keep wondering, why are they so stressed? And then you may even
Mm.
start blaming them. It's just
Mm.
that you take everything too seriously, makes
Yeah.
you stressed. Whereas it's because they're carrying the burden of
Mm.
the things you are not carrying because you're
Yeah.
being positive.
Yeah, because you can't share them. You're trying to share in half the load, but it's no, you're still carrying them, because the other person can't identify, or is almost even refusing to identify. They just
They can't
within
even
their,
see,
yeah,
they can
yeah, they can't.
experience it. Yeah. So I had this other client who she struggles with health anxiety.
Mm.
But part of the problem being that she's got three children, and often when the children are sick, her husband is very positive minded. So he doesn't really think it's not a big deal. They'll get better in the next few days, right?
Mm.
And so to have, she's thinking, if it's something serious, that's how we're going to leave our children, and they just deteriorate. And so she carries all the stress and anxiety. And so you'll be wondering, oh, why is she going around looking so upset and stressed? But the reality is she's carrying the burden for two people. Okay.
Mm.
So really what we're trying to highlight is that there's something going on as we're trying to live life that if we don't recognize it, we're either living in a loop that's causing us to fail in certain areas we're trying to do better at, or we're either living in a way where we're balanced and seeing those loops and being in control of those loops. And this is
Mm.
really what we want to look at here. I'm going to be using a strategy to help us be able to see those things clearly and work out how to prevent being on either extremes. Because you can see both extremes. It's not necessarily that the person who's being positive is doing something bad, but it's more because they're in an extreme. Or the person who's being a worrywart or worrying about whatever risk could occur is doing something bad. But again, it's because of the
Mm.
extremes. Yeah. So we're going to go into strategy now. And the hot pepper sauce strategy, we're going to start with blending system 1 with system 2. Right. System 1 is the instinct, and system 2 is the logic. Okay, so we're going to start with the game part now. So you got to guess, what does SQP mean?
That one I like. I think that one is selecting quality peppers, isn't it?
Oh, okay, you remember.
Yeah.
So selecting quality peppers, and what do you think that relates to in this case?
All right, I didn't have to push it. I'm gonna just, you know what I mean? Just let me have the little win. Try that loud. Selecting quality peppers. So, can't quite remember. Yes. Okay, selecting quality peppers. So the hot peppers represent the kind of like the instinctive reaction. I'm just gonna say this. I don't think this is right.
Just
But
say it, yes, please.
is it? So you're selecting quality pepper. So the instinct's not necessarily, yeah, it's coming from past experiences, but you're not necessarily going to then take the quality of those past experiences. You know what? I can't actually remember. I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah. So if we say this, the peppers are the instincts, definitely.
Yeah.
Which means then to select quality peppers would mean selecting the quality instincts. In other words, you're selecting the instincts that are actually kosher and working right, because it's not every instinct you respond to will be an effective thing. Going back to sorry, go on.
Yeah, so I was wondering that. So I was considering that, but then thought, normally, isn't your reaction quite rash? It's something that you almost like, you're not really thinking about, you're not considering it. And it's almost like the first thing that comes to your mind. And so, with that in mind, how would you select? How can you be selective with your instincts?
Yeah. And you raised a very important point there, because what most people would think is, since it's my instinct, it happens without me even thinking. Where would I even have the chance or opportunity to select the right one? Right. Okay.
Especially when you're caught up in your emotions.
Exactly. One of the ways we would do that would be by working on reflecting on things that has happened in the past already. So you've been through a situation where you instinctively responded in the way that actually wouldn't work for you. Spending some time reflecting on that and reviewing that eventually starts to work in some changes to your instincts over time. And that's part of the process of selecting the quality instincts. Because when I know, okay, in this particular time, my instinct made me react in a way that made things go bad, I have to start thinking, how can I change that? Now, this is where it's quite crucial, because sometimes it's not necessarily that you need to totally discard the instinct. It may be that we need to adjust the instincts in some way. Going back to Karima's experience, being in a relationship, some men can be quite negative. Her instinct was, she got into a relationship where the man was initially kind and then became poisonous. So she's expecting every kind man to be poisonous, which is not necessarily the case. But now I have to start thinking, okay, because I have this instinct to see kindness as a trap, I have to be careful not to jump straight to the fact that it's a trap, but find other ways of exploring that first of all. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense, but I almost feel that almost is borderline into the reflective thinking side of things.
Yeah. So in a way, you can think of both as working together to strengthen each other.
Yeah.
So if we do the reflective thinking in a particular way, eventually the reflective thinking becomes instinctive. So that's the selecting quality peppers. We're just making sure that the instincts that we are relying on are instincts that will help us than work against us. And you've been asking, how do we actually get to that point? And that's where the AV comes in, doesn't it? Can you remember what AV is?
I remember what AV is. So AV, I remember, is the aged vinegar.
Yes.
And I remember the aged vinegar because that is the reflective think that is more about reflective thinking. And I
Yes.
remember this well because this is what I tend to lack.
Why do you say that?
I want to say lack. What I mean is my default is that instinctive reaction rather than the reflective thinking. And so I remember that part because that's an area that I need to develop for myself. And I think again having that balance between the two in order to make more considered to have a more considered response, I think. So yeah, so I definitely think, yeah, so for me, the aged vinegar in terms of neutralizing that reaction is definitely something that I can relate to because that's not my default. Mine is
Okay.
the extreme in the other direction.
I would argue with that a little bit.
Okay, go on.
And the reason I argue with that a little bit is because often people would think that they fall strongly with one rather than the other. But often what happens is in certain situations they fall in one camp. In other situations they fall more in another camp. For example, someone who is a mother, for example, right? If she's walking on the road and someone jumps out of the blue, she jumps in front of her children, instinctive, right? So in that kind of situation, the instinct will always come in that for that mother. But the same mother, when she finds herself in a situation where husband is trying to make a decision that requires to use the finance of the family, the mother starts to become more reflective in the thinking and trying to guide the husband in a reflective way. So people tend to have both.
Yes. Yeah. So what
And
you're saying is it's quite situational then.
quite often it's quite the situation. So the goal would be figuring out what situations tends to bring certain instincts that I don't like or that I don't feel benefits me, and to work around balancing those ones. That makes sense.
Yeah. Yes, that does make sense. So I remember, I always take this away from when we worked together. You used to always say that whenever you used to come to me with an idea, I used to always shoot it down really quickly. No, there you go. We're not doing that. Not interested. Let's not bother with that. I've tried and tested other things, but that just ain't gonna work. And then I'd go away and come back and go, actually, you know what? Let's think about that. I didn't even recognize that, but I remember you actually saying to me, you know what, it's all right, I recognize that you will always say something straight away, you'll always say no and shoot it down. But then after a while you go and reflect on it and you'd always come back and discuss it. So I have always taken that with me because I thought actually that is just such a true reflection of who I am and what I do. Still a work in progress. Well, I haven't conquered that yet. Still a work in progress. But I recognize that. Yeah, so I definitely, so there is that side of it. But I definitely agree with you when you say about actually in different situations, because I believe that when it comes to other people, I'm more reflective. As much as yes, kids danger, I'm going to have that instinct, that quick instinct. But I think when it comes to other people, I'm a lot more reflective, and I'll take time, particularly being a coach. I have to listen to what people are saying and take a step back and not jump in and say, oh no, you should be doing this, and letting them like work through it. But for myself, I think there's like a real element of being like in defense mode a lot of the time. And so it's always going to be those quick responses rather than actually let me reflect, think about it, and then respond.
So we all have this going on where in some situations we're just relying too much on our instincts. And if we start to notice that there's some areas where some certain problems just keeps repeating, there's a high likelihood that there's an instinctive reaction going on based on some strong systems that we have experienced or some strong beliefs we have developed. So that brings us to PB. PB.
Now, so I've got all these acronyms down to a T. PB is the perfect blend.
Oh man, did you spend the last week studying those?
Almost every day. Didn't have any sleep. No, I didn't. I was not going to come on here. No, but the perfect blend for me, that's the easiest one to remember because that is like the having the quality peppers and have the right balance of the quality peppers and also like the aged vinegar to make sure you have that balance between the two. So it's that instinctive response plus that reflected thinking together. Because again, as you said, normally it's like the extreme of one to the other, but actually it's quite important to have a little bit of one and have a little bit of the other and actually bring them together. Because for me, those past experiences that are going to drive my decisions are what's going to actually help me to make better choices. But it's that reflective thinking that's going to say to me, hold on, but are you taking it from like a negative point of view? And is this the same thing that triggers you and gets you in bad situations? Or actually, is this from learned experience? This is the right route to take. So for me, that is the perfect blend. And I think even when I think about that perfect blend, one, again, I think it goes back to being situational as well. There's times when you will have time to think and you will be like, oh, okay, let me not respond that way and let me have a little bit of time to reflect and see if this is the right reaction. And other times it's going to be like, actually, I know this isn't the right reaction, but this is the emotion I'm in right now. And I'm just going to grab that one and go. So even though I've reflected on it, I'm still going to grab the one that I'm used to and comfortable with because that's how I feel at that time. And then what happens is I'm then feeling like, yeah, I should have done that. that wasn't the right way. I knew better than that. And now I'm feeling like terrible for responding and choosing the wrong course of action.
Yeah. And I guess it's important kind of to highlight that quite often the instinctive responses tend to be triggered more when we're in an emotional state. And naturally, then when we're in a more logical state, then we're more able to reflect. And why is that important? Because quite often people would get in a situation where they get frustrated with themselves. Why do I keep responding like that? I don't want to be that person who gets overwhelmed and then break down, or I get angry and frustrated and then act in ways that I'm not supposed to act, or get so anxious that I'm not able to move forward with whatever it is I'm doing again. Why do I keep responding in those ways? It's more because in the emotional state, the instincts would usually take over. And for good reasons, because in most cases, when our emotions are needed, there's some sort of danger, problem that needs the quick emotional response to keep us safe. So if you are walking on the street and you got a lion jump at you, you heard me say this a few times, you get a lion jump at you, you don't want to sit down and be reflective about it. You just want to run. So life requires those instincts to be there in those situations. But because we know emotions will cloud reflection, it's good to always notice, okay, I'm in an emotional state at this moment. Let's give it time before I make a decision on whatever it is.
Yeah.
Then that reduces the chance of the instinct being the main driver of everything we're doing.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's always hard when you're like in that moment. I think it's easier when you're in that moment, say, even if it's with another person, like that a bit of conflict comes up, or just even a situation. And as I said, for me, sometimes it's like being in that defense mode. So always been in that defense mode. And that's probably historically where I was in situations, maybe workplaces or other type of relationships, and not necessarily intimate relationships, but just in terms of just relationships with other people, whether family members, etc., where I felt like I had to always be defending myself or validating myself. So therefore, I'm in that mode of that reaction all the time. And so it's really being able to assess that and say, is that this, or is this just you being emotionally driven because of past experiences? So yeah, I think that's definitely. I think, as you said, with most things, it's about that situation. What situation are you in that's going to drive that particular reaction? And I think practice obviously makes perfect because I don't think it's something that happens overnight. You really have to create a habit and almost like a new identity for you to behave in the in another manner. I don't even want to say the correct manner, because what is correct for each situation, but to
Exactly.
at least act in a more, as I say, considered manner in terms
Yeah.
of your response.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think this actually highlights an important problem because though we're trying to balance the instinct and the reflection, there is a risk. The risk would be that if a situation requires instinct and you're being reflective,
Mm,
you have a potential to cause problems for yourself that's not there. Or if a situation requires reflection and you're being instinctive, you have a potential to cause problems.
mm.
And I guess the big question then is, one, how do we determine what should be the driving force, the instinct or the logic? Or the rush, or the reflection. And I think I was kind of bringing a question here, and I'm wondering whether there is a real answer that we can have to that. What should be what should be the deciding factor that tells you, okay, you have to be instinctive here, or tells you actually there's room for reflection here? What are your thoughts on that?
So this is an interesting one, because I almost had the same question. Yeah, it was that really, because if based on your own experience, you're instinctive, and then you recognize that, and then based on your own experience, you're a reflective thinker, and you might take too long to even make decisions, or you might be too, on the other hand, you might be too quick. How will you know when, based on your own judgment, that you're actually making that right decision? And I suppose it's looking at the responses and the outcome of the choices that you've made, whether it was that instinctive or it was the reflective thinking, but actually being able to recognize that, where you spoke before and you said, actually, those people when you gave the examples of clients who are self-sabotaging themselves, they're actually quite oblivious to the effect it's having on others, let alone the effect it's having on themselves. They realize that something isn't right, doesn't feel great, because now it leads to things like anxiety and depression for them, but they're still not recognizing it's there from their own behavior. So that's why I was actually going to ask you that same question. How do you determine that, actually, how do I know this is the right decision for me? Because actually that knee-jerk reaction makes me feel very good sometimes, even though it could be coming from a real negative place. And later I think, yeah, actually on reflection, I shouldn't have done that. But it feels right at that particular time. So understanding that, actually, no, there needs to be that balance. How do you actually determine that choice?
Yeah. So really, there are a few things here. One would be experience, like we said, experience. And experience means just reflecting on many experiences that you've had around something. So let's say you have this experience, and this example may completely fall flat, but you have this experience of noticing that every time you dated a man who wears a blue shirt, they tended to be narcissistic, right?
Mm.
Okay. This instinct, you're going to start having the instinctive connection to that. Okay, there's a blue shirt. Could he be narcissistic too? Okay. Whilst the reality is that's not necessarily the case, but the fact that something has happened as an instinct, but actually linked to something that could be a threat to you, warrants for us to be able to listen to that instinct sometimes. Okay. And if not, what I'm saying is listen to the instinct sometimes.
Mm.
Because one is to listen, another thing is to react to what the instinct is telling you to do.
So when people say trust your gut reaction, do you agree with that?
To some degree, yes, because the gut's reaction is saying something and is relating to something which we need to take into consideration. The
Mm.
problem we'll fall into is if we don't take into consideration at all. Now,
Mm.
but taking into consideration doesn't necessarily mean that we're reacting to it, but at least we're taking into consideration to start off.
Mm.
So I will always say that, okay, sometimes when the instinct is relating to someone's life, death, health,
Mm.
it's good to listen more to your instinct because obviously if there was someone jumping into your house with a machete to come and kill you, you need to be
Yeah.
instinctive.
So I'm going to reflect. I wonder if I should take the door, maybe go to the window, phone a friend. Yeah, you're going to react, of course.
Whereas if you've not been able to find a job and you know that in the next 5 months, your savings are going to go out, right? But you are being instinctive by allowing yourself to be over worried that the money's going to finish and you're okay. By living in that instinctive mode, that's not helpful that particular moment, because yes, there's a threat, but it's a long-term thing that you
Mm.
can still work towards, right? That allows for more reflection.
But I don't know. I think there's also two ways though, because I think sometimes, like for that particular situation, I think sometimes we think, oh, I've got plenty of time, I've got 5 months. And then there's that reflective time where you're actually just thinking about it, almost planning, but you're not really doing anything. A bit like when you have a deadline for an essay or a project or something. You're thinking about it, but actually you're not really doing anything. And then till the point of that deadline is when you're going to be really instinctive, and then you're just going to react quite quickly and
Yeah.
usually not get the best results.
Okay. And that's
I
why.
know.
So that's why we're saying it allows for more reflection. Not
Mm,
necessarily to say that we're completely ignoring the instincts then.
mm,
And because as you brought that up, that's very important, because what will happen for a lot of people will be to go towards the reflective point, to the point of procrastination and not dealing with the thing that needs
yeah.
to be dealt with.
Which can also lead again to then a bit of depression, because you start thinking, I'm not just really seeing any results. And then you start falling along that depression route, opposed to the opposite of you've done nothing, and in the last minute you realize, oh my goodness, time's coming up, our money's run out, or the deadline's coming, and then you lead into more anxiety because
Exactly.
you've not prepared in that sense.
Exactly. So the idea here is that both are important.
Mm.
And this is why we're talking about the perfect blend, isn't it? But then there's EC. What would you say EC means?
I was on a bit of a winning streak. EC. Is that something to do with evaluation? Can't think
Yeah.
of the C.
Yeah.
What's the
Something to do with
C?
evaluation.
I'm with C. What is the C? Evaluation. Evaluation. Evaluating. Ah, I don't know. What is it?
Evaluate continuously.
Oh, continuously. Yeah,
Continuously,
just
yes.
note that's half a point there. I've got there.
That's a whole point.
Still not a point. Yes, evaluate continuously.
And this is important
Mm,
because I think in life we start to suffer. We start to get into trouble in life where we feel we have the final solution that works, and we've got a permanent situation, that we've arrived at the wisdom where
mm,
we just know how to make things work. Because the reality is, no matter how wise you've become, no matter how knowledgeable you've become, circumstances around you is always in flux and changing.
yeah.
The things that require instinct and things that require reflection, they're always morphing and changing. Because if you think about it, when you were in primary school, the things that needed you to be instinctive will be very different from university, very
Mm.
different from being a mother or being a father. As life is changing, you're also supposed to be evaluating continuously and understanding your instincts and your logical response, your rational responses.
Mm.
So we've got that evaluating continuously, and this is linked with, we call it like taste testing,
Mm.
which will be a blend of you try something, you see how it worked, or you review things that has happened in the past and see how it's worked, or
Mm.
you explore with other people things you've done and see how it's worked.
And then when you
Um,
say exploring with other people, do you mean as in other people as in like professionals? Do you mean as in going into particular groups with like-minded people that might be going through the same thing as you? Or are you talking about maybe friends, or if you're in a relationship with somebody and that person is experiencing the almost like the backlash of your behavior? Is it that person? When you say other people around you, how does that taste testing how does that work?
Actually, all the examples you've given there, all the will actually work for other people,
Mm,
because for each group offers something different, a
mm,
different perspective to the problem, which is quite good. Because if you go to people who are going through a similar struggle, they help you understand that you're not alone,
mm,
but they also help you understand things that they've tried that has worked and maybe would not work for you, but bearing in mind that your circumstances may slightly be different from theirs, so it may not necessarily work.
yeah.
Going to someone who you are in a relationship with, who's on the other side of the picture of whatever is going on, offers a completely different perspective that's quite unique to support it. As long as the person is not bound on proving you wrong, because that can be a bit hard to work with. But if the person is genuinely objective it tends to be that what they have to bring into the picture can be very helpful and healthy to us.
Which can be difficult actually, because that can be quite subjective actually, because that's a really valid point that you've made in terms of that person not trying to prove you wrong, because
Yes.
actually, because they feel like they've gone through a period with you where you wasn't actually taking them into their thoughts or emotion or whatever into consideration. Now that you're actually giving them the opportunity, it's almost like they're uploading, like they're firing all those shots back at you
Back at
because
you.
they don't they've got all this pent up things that they want to really say, but it doesn't really help the situation. You know, it's almost
Yeah.
like they have to offload it, and unfortunately, they upload it onto you and not
Mm.
really in the right way. And
Hmm.
so that can actually be really quite unhealthy and
Yeah.
unhelpful for both parties.
Exactly. Exactly. So really, it's about finding the right people, but just
Mm,
knowing that you actually have a number of different types of groups of people that you can
yeah.
seek out for that reflection. Okay.
Mm.
Then there's the last one here, which is ID. Can you remember that?
ID. Is that anything to do with decisions? No. Oh, this is annoying.
This is annoying.
What is ID?
Try not to be too instinctive as you're answering.
So you've done take this and evaluate continuously.
Okay.
Go on.
So it's incorporate
Give
diversity. It's a
it.
diversity one.
Oh,
So
I went from
incorporate
social to
diversity.
that.
So why are we incorporating diversity? Because if you think about it, just like you've said earlier on, a lot of things, the information that's in our reflective thinking and in our instinctive thinking happen to be information that we've experienced in our life.
Hmm.
And because they can be in our own bubble, they can tend to be biased by the things we have experienced in our own bubble, whether that's be tradition or ethnic minority group or the job sector you're in,
Hmm.
whatever it is, there's a tendency for you to just develop biases
Hmm.
anyway. And sometimes those biases would infiltrate your thinking in a way that makes you then stick to certain ways of
Hmm.
deciding or reacting. And so by actually going for different groups of people outside
Hmm.
your normal body of or your culture,
Hmm.
sometimes you can get some very novel ways of addressing some of these things. I can take it to one example was there's a time I was trying to learn how to work with a situation that often happens. So there was this mother who was really saddened by the fact that she was trying to have a better relationship with her daughter, but I was not having this. And that was because when the daughter was much younger, mother was an alcoholic, right? And she used to neglect the daughter quite heavily, right? But now she had stopped drinking for years now, and she's trying to improve the relationship with her daughter. But it turns out that any kind of conversation she has, the daughter's just angry all the time, just shouting at her all the time. And unfortunately, when the daughter becomes angry and shout at her, it triggers her, and she shouts about her. It becomes
Hmm.
a shouting match. And she was saying that she didn't want that to keep happening. She didn't want this shouting match
Hmm.
to keep happening. And my usual approach in therapy would just be to talk this through and just keep trying to find solutions. But I decided, okay, let's try something different. Let's try using imagination. Okay. Because I picked up some new ways of working around imagination.
Hmm.
And the idea was you imagine what has happened, all the things that has happened, so situations where the arguments happen. So imagine being with your daughter, she's starting the argument again and you arguing back. But then start imagining you not arguing back in those situations
Hmm.
and you actually just talking nicely back despite her arguing. I spent a lot of time practicing that imagination. And so about 2 weeks later, the mother came back to me saying that they've been able to sit down together and have a meal together
Oh
peacefully,
wow.
right?
Amazing.
So for me, I actually went out of my own culture of how I would think,
Hmm.
the normal CBT approach that I would use. And for the client, so she was also going out of our own culture by incorporating this idea that seemed really strange
Hmm.
from the therapist. But then that gives that diverse way of thinking, brings a new solution to a situation that then
Hmm.
enabled the client to stop responding to the instinct of anger and change the scenario around. I hope that made sense.
Yeah, definitely. And there's very much that saying about if you keep doing the same thing over and over again and it's not working, and you're getting the same results, it's insanity. So sometimes you have to do something different. And because,
Definitely.
you know, I love the saying that if nothing changes, so we
Hmm.
do have to make change, do something different to see different results. Yeah,
Definitely.
that really makes sense. But it's also interesting as well, just from you, from like the professional point of view, actually trying something different as well.
Yeah.
And by
Yes.
you
Yes.
trying something different, it helped the client to, yeah.
Exactly. So this brings us to the end of the hot pepper sauce formula.
Mhm.
And so it's something that just can help you when you're trying to deal with life and trying to improve on things. It's a strategy that you can work and build upon. And the better you get to understand how to use it, the better life becomes. And that's really
Mm.
just the goal of this. It's really a complex strategy, but we
Mm.
try to make it succinct and make it more usable with the way we have explored it today.
Yeah.
Uh, yes, I just wondered, do you have any final words out here?
I think just really even just to summarize it, just to break it down really simply. I think it's really having that, again, just having that perfect blend of the instinctive and the reflective thinking. But it also once it's about actually evaluating, see what's actually working, and sometimes it's just your own thoughts and by your own experiences alone, you're not necessarily going to come up with the right outcome. So sometimes we say that having other people, getting other people's opinions, but just being careful whose opinions you're getting and not, not basing it on people who are necessarily have no experience in that particular area and who are quite biased. So it's about, again, I suppose, incorporating that diversity in terms of the different areas that you get that information and then just trying it. Does this work? Is this working for me?
Exactly.
Okay, let me tweak it. Doesn't mean just because you did something and it didn't work, doesn't mean that that's a no go. It's actually, let me
Yeah,
just tweak
exactly.
it a little bit and then
Exactly.
see what the results are. But as you
Exactly.
say, it's that continuous evaluation and then just
Exactly.
checking in to see how does it lead you to the more desired outcome.
Exactly, exactly. So really, I think the big important point here is to recognize that these systems exist, right?
Mm,
Because if you don't know they exist, what's happening is that you're going to go through living life being controlled by these
mm,
forces without even knowing that they're controlling you.
mm,
Just wondering why is things going a particular way all the time. But
mm,
once you start to recognize these systems and you actually start to be in charge of these systems, you have a better say in the direction that life goes for you, and that's the goal we want for you as you're listening to us today. That you go away from this
mm,
talk and you feel you have better agency over the things that's
mm.
happening in your life, really. But before we just round up, I just want to get out there to just give a little bit introduction into who she is and what she does so that you can reach out to her and see if you can use some of her services. So, Althea, do you want to just give us a little bit of what you do?
Yeah, okay. So I am Alfie Blake. I am a transformation fulfillment coach, and I really help. There's two streams of things that I do. One is really helping corporate teams to really work together, nurturing those teams to thrive within the environment that they're in. And I'm also a youth business coach and mentor as well, using entrepreneurship as a way to build self-esteem, communication skills as well. So that's like me in a nutshell. Details will be below. So if you continue to reach out to me for anything, please feel free to do so.
And as usual, I'm your host, Adewale, yes, the author of StressTherapist.net. And my goal is I have a strong vision to make sure that mental health issues become a thing of the past, that there's no stigma against anybody who has a mental health difficulty, but that the life you live, you'll be able to live truthfully and enjoyably without any emotional stresses or problems. Okay, thanks. Bye.